Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Lochlyn, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. Recently, the OGS Samuel D. Isley Library received the donation of a book titled Thus Passes the Glory of Earth, Memories of Nineveh Road in the 1890s, written by a Huron County, Ohio man named Charles Templar over a century ago. Recently, the young man we're speaking with today on Ohio Roots, Lochlyn Ramsey, transcribed and published copies of this book for his grandfather, who was one of the people who received a copy of Mr. Templar's original typescript manuscript. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lochlyn about his experience transcribing Mr. Templar's story. Well, I'd like to welcome Lochlyn Ramsey to the Ohio Roots podcast. Lochlyn, thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Usually when we do these kind of conversations with folks, usually the first thing I always ask them is, what got you interested in genealogy? And what's interesting, I think, about you is you're not a genealogist. You don't claim to be a genealogist. You're a budding historian. Would that be a good way to call it? Or are you studying history, I think?
Yeah. Right now I'm studying history at Ohio Northern University. During the summers, I do work for the National Park Service.
Okay. So what I usually ask folks is, what got you interested in doing genealogy? What was your origin story, a la comic book hero? So I'll ask you the same question, but in the standpoint of what is it that got somebody, interested in history? As someone who studied history myself, and have my degrees in history, I can relate to a young person actually liking history. I know it's hard for people to believe, but I'd like to hear from you. What is it that got you interested in studying history, and particularly, I know you do a lot of stuff with local history.
Yeah. So ironically, my origin with history is actually sort of through genealogy. Growing up, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' houses. My maternal grandparents live right next door, and both sides of my family are meticulous record keepers, very organized. One of the books they had on their shelf was a compilation of family history that one of my grandma's cousins had written sometime in the 2000s, and that was my favorite book. I loved turning through it. It had all the heraldry from the Scottish tribes and stuff, and I was completely fascinated by that. And then at school, I had some excellent history teachers in middle school and high school. And I came to Ohio Northern, not actually as a historian. I spent a lot of time in the engineering field, and I intended to be a computer engineer. But through some connections and some chance happenings, I ended up working for the National Park Service summer of in between my freshman and sophomore year. And I came back and I realized that this is really where my heart is. This is what I wanted to do. So I ended up changing my major and much happier now.
Well, good. Yeah, it's studying history is a long haul, man. It's an interesting field to study, and I always enjoyed doing it. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, and I have to give credit to the OGS librarian Linda Swanson for recommending that we chat with you, was because we recently received at the OGS library a book that you edited and annotated that deals with a local history story for Huron County. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your process for doing that. And one of the reasons why was because several years ago, I was handed a typewritten manuscript that my grandfather had done about his memoir, basically a memoir of his early life. And I basically did exactly what you did. I took that memoir and I re-entered it into a proper modern format and annotated it and edited it and did all these other things with it to make it readable and enjoyable and give people a slice of history for what it was like to live in Fall River, Massachusetts in the early 20th century, which is where he was from. So I could really relate to it when I saw the work. Now, this isn't your family specifically, but and we'll get to that. I'll let you chat about that a little bit. But I'd like to hear the story about how this manuscript kind of came into your hands.
Yeah, so the manuscript was originally titled Nineveh in the 90s. It's the memoirs of a man named Charles Templar who lived on Nineveh Road near Greenwich, Ohio. He was born in 1890 and he lived there until he went to college in the early 1910s. And it was just his experiences with church and school and the people that lived on the road and the communities surrounding it. He typed these memoirs up sometime, I believe, around the 1950s or 60s, based on some context clues he gives in the book. And distributed copies, I don't know how the distribution process worked, but eventually it got into the hands of my grandfather and his brother-in-law. My grandmother's family had a farm on Nineveh Road. One of the neighbors gave them the book to learn more about the road and the area around it. When it was given to them, it was actually given with the warning that some of the people mentioned in it were still alive, so they shouldn't share it with anyone. And so they held on to that for a while, and then I said it was 2020, 2021. My grandpa came to me and asked me to reformat it, like you mentioned. And initially he just wanted me to type it up and he was going to print it out and put it in binders so he could distribute it to other members of the family still living in the area. But I knew that wasn't going to be a very pleasant format for them to read. And so I put in a little extra work to actually turn it into a book with annotations to describe some of the antiquated terms and such that he uses.
So when you were doing this process, and I assume that this Charles Templar probably mentions the names of a lot of people who lived on Nineveh Road and families and things of that nature. Did it give you kind of an insight into what the community was like?
Yeah. He talks a lot about the church community. Most people on Nineveh Road went to the Methodist church there. And so he talks about their interactions in the church. And he talks about how he interacted with the kids at his school and what they do for fun. And then he also talked about some of the outsiders. And one of the chapters he mentions that there was a neighbor of theirs that was kind of an outcast because he was a Democrat and everybody else was voting for McKinley. And so he talks about how over the years he got to know him, but just different interactions between the people.
Yeah. You mentioned antiquated terms, and I know that Linda, the OGS librarian, mentioned a specific term to me when she was laughing about some of the terms. And I don't know if it's one you remember or not, but the use of the term mango.
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting one because I made a mistake in the book. I didn't have all of the information. I should have done a little more research. He mentions growing mangoes on his farm, and I have no idea what that could be referring to. The closest association I could come up with for northern Ohio would probably be something like a pawpaw, as far as fruit goes. But after I gotten the book finished, I gave a copy to one of my grandparents, and they were reading through, and they're like, "Well, you know what mangoes are, right?" I'm like, "No." And they said, "Well, they're peppers, bell peppers."
Right.
And I had no idea of that term, and even in my research, I hadn't come up with any relation.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating because we tend to, when we read, antiquated writing and things like that, it's hard not to project our own image of what something's supposed to be onto the text, despite the fact, that we may not know anything about what's in the text.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. To learn more about joining, visit www.ogs.org.
If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening. Now, you mentioned that he basically was just kind of typing them up and giving them to his own family members and neighbors, the original author.
Yep.
So when your grandfather gave you the manuscript or the typescript, and then you converted into kind of a book form, talk to me about how you had that published and distributed on your end.
So once I had it typed up, I was looking for somebody that would bind it, and I learned that Barnes and Noble will bind anything if you give it to them in a Word doc. And so that's what I ended up doing. I got a hardcover because that was fairly cheap, and then got a certain number of copies printed and gave them to my grandfather. And he handed them out to family members I knew. I know he took a copy to the Greenwich Historical Society, and then the copy that the OGS has is kind of a strange story. I believe he gave it to Henry Timon, the Huron County historian. And I think he passed it on to OGS, which we didn't really know until we got a letter from OGS thanking for our contribution.
Yeah. It's well, for us, from a genealogy standpoint, genealogists often obviously stress things like birth dates and marriage dates and death dates, but books like what you worked on Templar and the Nineveh Road in Huron County, books like that, what they allow us to do when we're doing our genealogy, of course, is flesh out the lives of the individual. And I think that if someone listening, is doing Huron County genealogy and lived in that area, I think they would be very interested in perusing, a book that would talk about the Nineveh Road and the individuals in that area. Did you index it? I don't remember looking at the back of the book if you put an index in it or not.
No, that's something. Looking back on it now that I have historical research experience, that would be one of the main things I would change. I'd index it. I'd properly cite all my sources and all that. But
well, it's interesting, when you do that, when you're writing, when you're taking somebody's typescript like that, and a lot of times you want to keep it in their voice. Obviously, you don't want to, you don't want to deprive them of their own voice. I know when I did my grandfather's memoir, one of my aunts, I said, well, I need to do some editing and some annotating. And my aunt said, oh, he would not have liked that. So, I mean, there's a challenge, to doing somebody else's typescript, I'm sure. Now, the book is fascinating. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. Was the main reason was we've got this now at the library. So if people want to come and check it out and look at it, they can do that. But also, I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of your other activities, historical activities that you take part on in Huron County, and also kind of pick your brain a little bit once we get past that. So go ahead and talk to me a little bit about what other things are you engaged in there?
Yeah. So my primary Huron County specific work is with the North Fairfield Historical Society, Fairfield, Ohio, in between Greenwich and Norwalk. Small village, right near where I grew up. And so I initially started working for them with my Eagle Scout project. They had received a school bell from the school that was in the town, and then had been merged with the other district. And they wanted a way to display it. So I built a brick display stand, put a time capsule inside, and put some flower boxes around.
Nice.
And then continuing on from there, the curator has been a family friend for a long time. And so I did more for them, some projects here at school that I could convert for their purposes, including making a website, updating some of their technological presence.
Nice. So, one of the challenges we have, and I don't think it's unique to the Ohio Genealogical Society, and you probably see it even at your local historical society, is attracting young people to become members and be active in organizations, not just genealogy or historical organizations, but just in organizations in general. And I'm curious what you think, as a young person who is active, what can organizations like OGS or others do, you think, to be more appealing to a younger demographic?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is outreach, making your presence known. Often historical societies tend to be the same group of 5 to 7 people that meet every Wednesday night. Don't really try to reach out to the community or have any sort of social media or digital presence that can be located. Another thing is actively trying to share your information. A lot of times I've come across with historical societies, it's very insular. You can talk to people, say local history, you can say somebody's name, and everybody there already knows the property and whatever associated with that person, whatever businesses they owned. And it's hard to come into that space as a young person that has no knowledge of that background information, and nobody really wants to give you that information because, oh, that's common knowledge. Everybody already knows that already.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things I've worked on in the past is the idea of mentoring. When you have a young person come into an organization, whether it's OGS or a historical society, having a particular cadre of folks in that organization who take on the role of mentor in terms of guiding them and kind of introducing them to things. Do you think that's something that makes sense, or would it be too imposing?
I think that makes sense. Having somebody that's actively bringing people in, trying to get people involved, works really well. And also, if the new person's coming in with a unique skill set, utilizing that skill set
for
your purposes. If they're into PR and marketing, putting them onto a social media side of things, or podcasting or something like that, that you can utilize them for that resource. Obviously, don't use them only for that purpose, but
right. I'm just always concerned when I attend a meeting, not necessarily an OGS meeting, but other meetings that I'll go to. And the minute a new face walks into the room, everybody in the room kind of gets that kind of clammed up kind of look on their face. And when in the reality, we should be all smiling and laughing and being incredibly happy that somebody new walked into the room.
Yeah.
But it can be a challenge, I know. And I think it's probably daunting for a young person to walk into a room full of 50, 60, 70-year-old individuals who have been doing something for a very long time, or at least you walk in there with the assumption they have. Some of them may have just started last year, for all you know.
Yeah.
But you walk in with the assumption they've been doing it for a long time, and that can be pretty daunting and maybe prevents you from opening up. And it's a growing challenge. I mean, we're very lucky. I get to talk to a lot of chapters, OGS chapters, and some of our chapters are doing very well at recruiting new members, and some chapters are struggling. And I think listening to what you have to say, what you've said, I think is really very meaningful, very helpful for that. I want to come back to your book a little bit, or the book, I guess. Now that you went through the Barnes & Noble publishing aspect of it, is it something that somebody could purchase on Barnes & Noble if they were interested in acquiring it?
Not really. It's something that I could set up if I wanted to.
Sure.
I haven't for legality concerns.
Okay.
Obviously, Charles Templer's not related to me.
Right.
As far as I know, he doesn't have any living descendants who would want to distribute the book.
Sure.
But obviously, without that permission, I wouldn't want to impose that.
Okay. Well, then what we'll have to do is we'll have to rely on folks to come to the OGS library or to the local historical society near you and check it out and examine it. It looks like a wonderful resource just from what I've looked through. I think that people who are interested in Huron County history of that era and who might have family members and descendants or ancestors in that area, I think would love to just kind of get a glimpse of what that life was like. So you should be really applauded for taking the effort to do it. And your grandfather should be applauded for holding on to it for as long as he did. And I'm really pleased that OGS has a copy of it in our library to share with people. So, thank you. And thank you also, for joining us today for the Ohio Roots podcast. I really appreciate it. I hope to speak to more folks, young folks who are interested in history and genealogy as we go through. So it's nice to kind of start that process. So thank you, Lochlyn, for joining us. And I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
It is always great to speak with young people who are interested in preserving and sharing history, particularly local and family history. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Lochlyn, and if you find yourself at the OGS Samuel D. Isley Library in the future, be sure to take a look at Charles Templar's Thus Passes the Glory of Earth, Memories of Nineveh Road in the 1890s. Thanks for listening to the Ohio Roots Podcast.
The Ohio Roots Podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.